Appreciate that this morning. So it's Father's Day. I might as well bring my picture of my dad down for you. My dad died in 1978, a long time ago, but I feel as close to him now as ever. He's infinite spirit. I learned a lot of things from him. One thing I did not learn, however, was how to throw a football. I remember when he tried to teach me how to throw a football, he didn't know how. So I had to learn from somebody else, because you see, he wasn't raised by his father. His father was a brutal alcoholic. His mother, who was a drug addict, ended up leaving him, and then she couldn't raise him, so he ended up being raised by his aunts. One was a Christian Science practitioner, another one was a school teacher, and then after his mother died and the custody reverted to his father wanted no part of him. And one of the reasons why I found out years later, when I went to my sister's house, it was maybe 10, 15 years ago, I looked and I saw a picture that looked like my dad in a dress, and I went, what? And I realized, wait a minute, that's his mother. They looked identical. It was like my dad in drag. And I asked my sister about it, and she said, yeah, that's your grandmother. And she, of course, died in the 1930s. And my dad, my dad dealt with some pretty tough stuff. Both of his parents committed suicide. And he had a tough time. But he was also raised by people, his aunts, who taught him spiritual principles. And he began a practice at a very young age of quiet, meditating, receptivity. And what, besides learning dad jokes from him, which I passed down to my son, you know, today's the first Father's Day in 22 years. I don't have any kids around. It's kind of different. But I told all my dad's dad jokes to my son, and he promised he'd tell them to his kids. But besides that, I really learned how to create a space in my life for God. My dad every morning, as I've shared before, would read his daily word and his silent unity affirmations and spend 20 minutes, 15 minutes every morning in that quiet. And he told me when I was a little kid, this sets up my day. If I don't do this, and I never saw him not do it, my day doesn't go right. And in the afternoon, in his hardware store, if he could get away, if my grandmother could take over the customers, and they didn't want anything like, pipe threading or anything that she couldn't do, he would go into the back and spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Do you take time during the day to relax, to rest, to create a space for God? My dad practiced this. I watched it. It wasn't just platitudes. It wasn't just telling me, now son, you should act like this, or taking me to some church, dropping me off and letting them do the job. I watched it demonstrated, and I watched how his life changed when he did this spiritual work in his life. Later in his life, he joined the meditation group I was in, and he had migraines all his life, and at the end of his life, he didn't have migraines because he was meditating now for a half hour a day, 40 minutes a day, and he created even more space in his life. But do you take time in your life to create space for God? There's a wonderful minister who was trained by Unity and then went independent. Her name's Barbara King. Anybody remember Barbara King? She had a church in Atlanta, and I don't know that I don't know if she's still active, but she once was talking to a conference, and she talked about her talk title was "Piddling for God," and she talked about how when she was a little kid, her mom used to get on her because she would daydream. She would just kind of look out the window and just kind of kick her feet and look, and her mom would say, "What are you doing? We've got chores to do. You're just piddling. You're just piddling. When you get back to work, we're counting on you. You're just piddling." And so she felt that she needed to always be doing something. And then she realized when she became an adult, became a minister, that every single divine idea that popped into her head, every single creative endeavor in ministry or even in her personal life, every major change in her life that she made was as a result of an idea that popped into her mind out of nowhere, something coming out of nothing when she was piddling for God. I'm piddling for God. Together? I'm piddling for God. Now, when I say piddling for God, I don't mean binge watching Netflix or going out on the town, although those are all fine things. I'm talking about something that doesn't have any content. They talk about something in physics called the 0 point energy, the 0 point field. Anybody hear of that 0 point? It's what happens, if you don't know about it, just imagine out in the furthest reaches of space, between all galaxies, in the place where there's the farthest from anything, where there's just a vacuum. We're talking space. But Einstein predicted this, and they've been able to prove it, that in the absolute nothing, the absolute 0 point of the vacuum of space, there is no emptiness. There are infinite particles popping in and out all the time. You can't see them, but they're always doing it. There is an infinite number of possibilities in even the most empty moment. In fact, it's something coming out of nothing, just like the Big Bang came out of nothing but potential. So in the 0 point field or energy in the middle of empty space, there's infinite possibilities. And but you got to access it. How are you going to access that? How do you get in touch with it? You know, right now you might feel like you're kind of out there in space. You might feel like there's no possibilities. I don't see any answers, but you got to start piddling for God. You got to do something in your life to invite this awareness in, because it's always there in potential. You realize there's no end point. That empty space is not an end point, it's a starting point. That there's infinite potential from that point. Anything can happen, everything can happen. I am open to my infinite potential. Together, I am open to my infinite potential. I am open to infinite possibilities. Together, I am open to infinite possibilities. The physicist Alan Guth said that the universe is the ultimate free lunch because it came out of nothing. Just an ounce of stuff, he said, came out of nothing and then expanded. And I know I'm a science nerd, but let's get it down to your life and my life. There are times in your life when you just have to get in touch with the infinite nothing. My dad did it every day when he meditated, when he got quiet and did his daily word and his affirmations. But what do you do to piddle with God? Piddle for God. How do you get in touch with that something? There was another physicist, Feynman, Richard Feynman, who my sister actually knew, and he talked about the time in his life when everything changed. You see, he had been married while he was working on the Los Alamos project, developing the atomic bomb during World War II. His wife died of tuberculosis. He was thankful that his invention that he had worked on had brought a close to the war sooner, but when it got stolen by the Russians, and it was obviously a threat to the whole world now because it was in the hands of people that he didn't know, he didn't trust, and he asked himself, what's the purpose of my life? All my work in science is created this uncertainty, this fear, this threat, and what am I living for? And of course his wife had died, and so he was in this existential crisis. It's that 0 point possibility. He felt like he was just out in space, and you might relate to this. A time in your life, it could be even now or some aspect of your life. Just what's out here? But you're at that starting point where there are infinite possibilities. Well, he didn't intellectualize it like that. He just asked himself, well, why did I get into science? What was my purpose? And remember back when he was 16, 18, 20 years old, these ideas would come to him. He was curious about things just for their own sake. He wasn't trying to, here he was a tenured professor at Princeton who had to publish and had to do this and do that. He didn't have to do any of those things. He was always just operating from his curiosity. And so where was his passion? And where's your passion? Where's this infinite possibility? How can you access it? And as he was sitting there and asking himself, I haven't worked on anything or even asked a question about science that didn't have something tied to it. And as he was sitting there thinking about this and wondering how he could get back in touch with that innocent, open part of himself that Jesus called becoming as a child, becoming innocent and naive and playful and open, he looked around in the cafeteria where he was sitting at Princeton, where he was thinking about this, and there was a table filled with the fraternity brothers, and they were all competing with each other with plates. They were spinning these cafeteria plates to see who could keep them going faster than the other ones. And he asked himself, as he watched them, and he watched how they wobbled, I wonder what the ratio is between the spin and the wobble. And I wonder, why did it wobble? And There was nothing tied to that at all. There was no purpose to it. No corporation was underwriting it. No government grant was there. He wasn't going to teach it in a class. He wasn't going to publish it. And he was tenured, so he could take a little time and carved out some time in his life to just do what gave him joy, to just piddle for God. And as he did this, he discovered some things. One thing led to another, led to another, led to another, and he got the Nobel Prize for Physics. It was the great accomplishment of his life, but you don't know when you're out in outer space in that vacuum what's connected to what and where it's going to lead you. You don't know. You say, oh, I'm retired, or oh, I've got this door closed, but there's something. You're at that point of infinite possibility. I am at that point of infinite possibility. Together, I am at that point of infinite possibility. Oh, but how do you get in touch with that? Well, I'm giving a few little metaphors for it, but one of the metaphors that worked for me at a point where I was at an existential crisis was turning down the burners on a stove. Now, I had, at that time, this was like 30-something years ago, I had moved to Hawaii. It's my second church. I'd taken a church that I knew it had a lot of problems, but I didn't know how many. They'd gone through 4 ministers in 17 months. So I was going in, and they had problems that they not only didn't teach me in ministerial school, but I'd never heard of, and I didn't know what to do. So I thought that I was going to go to the beach and solve those problems. And so I brought my journal, and I'm all for journaling. I love journaling, but I'm writing furiously trying to figure out the answers. If you ever do that, it's like running around in a squirrel cage. It's like running around in a hamster wheel, just trying to figure everything out. And if I could just think about it some more, I can make it work. And it was not working. The more I did it, the worse it got, until there I was on the beach. And what came to me was that I needed to let go as I was sitting there. And at that moment, a dog came up and stole my flip-flop and ran off with it. And I was very incensed, because here I was in the middle of solving my problem. So I was running after the dog, and the dog was playing keep away with me. And another dog came up, and the dog passed my flip-flop to the other dog, who then another dog showed up, and the 3 of them. And the minute I get to one, they'd pass it on to the other, and all that. And I started to get into it. I started thinking, it's kind of cool being a dog. I like this being a dog. And then after I started getting into it and being more playful, they started letting me have my flip-flop, and I would do it, and then I'd give it back to them. And we were doing this whole dog thing, and I was a dog. I was a dog. My gosh, it was so cool. And then I thought, well, dogs, what did they do? And I started, and they looked at me like, what? He's one of us. And so they started doing it, the 4 of us, and started doing this harmony. We were doing this. It was so much fun, and it was so great. And then I remembered my journal, my work. It's back there. I got to figure stuff out. I got to go back and do it. So I had my flip-flop, and I walked back, and they're like trying to get me to play. And I remember they were just like, what's wrong with you? And I just kind of brushed them away, and I put my flip-flop down. I started journaling again, and they stole my flip-flop again. Only this time the dog went way out to sea, as far as he could go. But, dogs can't quite swim as fast as humans, so I caught up with him. I took my flip-flop, and I went back to my spot, and I remember the last look on his face was a look that said, you stupid human, don't you have enough sense to be a dog? But as I did my work there, I realized, wait a minute, a picture came to me. I don't know if it happened right then or right after that, but a picture came to me of a burner with 6 burners, a stove with 6 burners with stuff in pots on the top that was boiling over, all 6 of them. And I would stir one as it starts boiling over, and then I would have to stir the other one. While I was doing that, another one would start boiling over. And I kept doing that, and I couldn't keep up with it. And then it came to me, you need to turn down the burners. Never mind going around trying to solve the problem in the pots. Turn down the burners. I turned down the burners. Together, I turned down the burners. How do you do that? You piddle with God. You take the moment. I became dedicated to my meditation time, and that week, something opened up for me. I had a dream, and forgive me the people who came to my dream seminar, but it was a dream of me essentially torturing kittens. It was a terrible dream. It was a nightmare. I was taking kittens and screwing them into light sockets, trying to get them to give off light. And when the ones that wouldn't give off light, I would poke with sticks, and I woke up. You can imagine how I felt. Do I have some kind of secret, hidden animosity towards kittens? What is this? What dark part of myself is it? Well, I did my technique that I shared in the dream seminar to let the kitten speak. Let the symbol speak. Don't judge it. And the kitten told me that she was Hello Kitty. Now, Hello Kitty came to the United States. Hadn't even gone to the mainland yet, but there I was in Hawaii, and there was a Japanese grocery store, and I'd seen Hello Kitty. And so I ended up buying all this Hello Kitty stuff and putting it all over my apartment to remind me of this, because Hello Kitty, in this interpretation, was like you're taking that playful kitten part of yourself and trying to make it give off light and poking at it instead of just letting me be and play. I'm a kitten. Let me play. And so I decided that what I would do is every week I would go to a new place on a safari. I lived in Oahu, for heaven's sakes. I hadn't seen anything, so I'd look at a new place. I'd go to a new place, and I would just be, and I would always have a spiritual time every day where I would just be, and it opened me up, and I had this Hello Kitty, and I remember if anybody came over to my apartment, they'd look around and say, "Hello Kitty, what are you doing here?" But there it was. It was to remind me to be playful, as Jesus said, become as a child, because you can't enter the kingdom unless you're playful like a child, teachable like a child, innocent like a child, open like a child. What's that about? That's being open and receptive to that playful part of yourself. And so I learned from this, and I was turning down the burners on the stove of my life, and the answers started coming. Actually, it was like I grew bigger than the problem. My consciousness grew to a point where I was able to the ideas would pop into my mind. Like Barbara King would say, when she was piddling for God, ideas would just pop into her mind. Like Richard Feynman, when he was just piddling and the spinning plates. In your life, what do you do to create a space in your life so that you can be open and receptive? There's a part of yourself that's at that 0 point possibility, that part of yourself that is connected to the all-knowing mind of God, that part of yourself that has all the answers. Remember our meditation a moment ago? I didn't make up that meditation. That came to me from Norman Vincent Peale. And when I drove him around that day back in 1978, he said, I'd ask him, how are you so prolific? And he said, I just take a blank piece of paper, because he wrote stuff every week. I said, and I couldn't see how he got all these ideas. And he said, I just take a blank piece of paper and I just ask for inspiration from the Holy Spirit. And then something comes. He says, it never fails. He says, and I never have any idea what I'm going to write when I sit down. And he said, an idea just comes. So something comes out of nothing. The universe is the greatest free lunch. I remember just reading a couple weeks ago, Frank Zappa said that all art is somebody making something out of nothing and selling it to somebody. That whatever it is, there's always something being created out of nothing. And you think, well, there's nothing there. Good. Because if there's nothing there, then you are connected with all possibilities. And then Norman Vincent Peale told the story of a time when he and his wife were in a crisis. I think he told this in his lecture that day. And they never identified what the crisis was. It must have been something personal. But the more they thought about it, the more bound up they got in it. They couldn't see any way out. They couldn't see any possibilities. And they were very concerned about it. Well, he was going to give a lecture at a convocation, a convention that was being held in a resort that was out in the woods somewhere, in this hotel that was right by a lake. And 2 hours before he was supposed to give his talk, which I think was for a service of some sort, on a Sunday, there was a Quaker service that was scheduled. He saw it on the sign there, and he said to his wife, Ruth, why don't we go to the Quaker service? Because he knew that the Quaker services had a lot of quiet. It was in Pennsylvania, and there were a lot of Quakers there, so it was for the community in that area. So they went to the Quaker service, and this is what happened. The woman, a lay woman who was leading the service, said to them, I know everybody in here has come in here with a problem or a question or something on your mind, I want you to imagine that you're holding it in your hands like it is a rock. Now look out the window. There's this beautiful lake that was still. She said, now in this meditation, I want you to think of this lake as the mind of God. It's still, it's calm, and we're going to do something with your problem. And so she led them into doing exactly what we did in our meditation, which is throwing the rock into the still lake, the mind of God that knows all possibilities, that can work on it. But it's not separate from you, she said. The mind of God is in you. As Jane Hart says, the Center for Enlightenment is in you. It's not something separate from you. This is inside of you, she said, but it's working on a deeper level of your beingness. And then, after she said that, and they all had their eyes closed, they sat in silence for 45 minutes. And they just listened. And on the way out, Norman Vincent Peale turned to his wife and he said, did you get an answer? And she said, yes, I did, a very sure answer. He said, I did too. And they shared their answers with each other. It was very specific and completely unusual and nothing that they had ever thought of, and it was the same answer. And they implemented it, and it worked. Now, he said to his wife, why didn't we know this answer before? What was it that happened in that room that we got the answer, each of us separately from each other? And she said, it's that we were holding on to it like the rock. We were holding on to it. We were all bound up in it. And you have to let go of it and trust it to the higher mind, the mind of God. And it's out of sight. That rock would drop into the lake, and then the ripples would subside, and you go back to the stillness. But that mind is working on it. Now, where in your life can you piddle for God? Can you turn down the burners? Can you create a playful attitude and play with the dog, be the Hello Kitty? I don't know, go on a safari. I can metaphor and totally confuse you, or maybe you'll just grab one and work with it. I don't know. But where in your life can you take all of these possibilities that are out there and get quiet enough to open up to it? And it doesn't mean that you have to do some big thing. It just means you need to take the time to go into a space of I don't know. We've got a workshop on Thursday that has a very playful attitude and way of handling it. Hallie Hopper's doing something on the God can. And you know what a God can is? I learned about the God can, or it was called the God box in this case, by a woman in my very first church, B. Sharback. She was, we only had one service. We only had 2 people teaching in Sunday school, small church. And she was one of them, so I really didn't know her that well. It took me 2 or 3 years before I got to know her. But she was a woman who'd been in recovery for about 40 years. She'd been in that church for about 25 years. And she was a storehouse of incredible information. And I remember her slogan in life, she told me, was, don't boss the job. I don't boss the job. Together? I don't boss the job. And then she taught me a way not to boss the job, which was the God box, or the God can. And you write down the problem as you understand it, and you put it in the God box. It's like throwing it into the lake. And then you let it go. And I have found, when I've used God books, I've used God boxes, God folders, God cans, but whenever I go back and look at what I wrote down, always it works out. Not necessarily according to my plans. That's the idea. You're letting it go into a higher mind, which is within you. But it always would work out. No exceptions. No exceptions. And so that became a practice in my life. Piddling for God. Letting go. Turning down the burners. Creating a space in your life. Creating a space of, I don't know. We have something out there on the table in the lobby called the question and answer process by Dr. Mary Allen. You go and ask a question and go into a space of I don't know. Create a creative space in your life. Back in 2014, there was a woman in my church, my last church, who did this a lot. She did a lot of piddling for God, and these ideas would come to her, and we started implementing them in the church. One of them was, well, she had a number of them. She had Christmas present programs and Easter programs where we would help the unadvantaged children in the school district. But one of them that came to her was a backpack program where we would, because a lot of these kids couldn't afford backpacks. And so we'd get the backpacks, put the stuff together, and she called me and she said, Greg, I got this idea. And by then I knew to listen to her. She said, the idea I have is that you're going to write a children's story. I'd never written a children's story, but I knew her well enough to say, well, let me give it some thought. The next day, my mentor, her name is Shireen, she lived in Oregon, and she just passed on about a month ago. But she was my mentor for about 15 years, and she called me and she said, Greg, I just get this feeling about you writing a children's story. I said, well, it's funny you should say it. Just yesterday, this other woman was telling me that I should do that. And she says, well, there's a reason for this. You're supposed to do it. And so I didn't know how to write a children's story. I'd never even thought of such a thing, although I had kids. But what I did was I just sat down, gave thanks for the children's story, and piddled for God. Closed my mind, closed my eyes, opened my mind, blanked my mind, and what popped into my head was, in the space of, I don't know, was a crab and a starfish. And I thought, a crab and a starfish, but then they changed. The crab turned into the sunshine, with big rays, and the starfish turned into a snowflake. And I thought, a snowflake, sunshine, what is that? And I wrote a story which is a metaphor for all change in life. So if you're dealing with change in your life, whether you're a child or an adult, this is a divine idea, and the whole story just came to me. And I just wrote it down. In fact, I was on my way somewhere right then. I was going to have to go somewhere, and I thought, if you will just write this down right now, it's there. And I just wrote it all down. And then we published it and put it in with the backpacks, and it was for all the kids. And we ended up winning an award for the city for doing good and all kinds of stuff. But I want to share with you this story as our closing meditation, because you might get a clue from it about the activity of change and the attitude that you need to take in the way of change, in the face of change. So I want you to just close your eyes and open your heart and just be playful. I'm telling you as the child, I'm talking to the child in you, this little bedtime story, The Little Snowflake and the Sunshine, a parable about change. Once upon a time, there was a little snowflake. Actually, it wasn't quite a snowflake. It was so tiny that you couldn't really call it a snowflake just yet. Maybe it was just a tiny seed of a snowflake. But if you looked at it under a microscope, there it would be, the tiniest image of a snowflake, born within a cloud. It kind of looked like a snowflake. Maybe it was a snowflake in training. And it grew, and it grew, and it grew until it fell right out of the cloud. It had grown way too big to stay there in the cloud, of course. But I don't want to fall out of my cloud, said the little snowflake. Another voice spoke. Hello, who are you? Asked the little snowflake. I am the sunshine. The what? The sunshine. What's that? I can't see any sunshine. Where are you hiding? I am here all around you, but you cannot see me. Now listen carefully. As you go along your journey, you must remember two different things. It is good for you to change. And to change, you must let go of who you once thought you were. And so the little snowflake drifted in the wind. Down, down, down. It drifted. Guided by the wind, it drifted. It didn't seem to have any real sense of direction, but then suddenly, thump, it had bounced off another snowflake. Thump, and another, thump, and still another. I don't like it when I bump into other snowflakes. I don't like it either, said a voice. I don't either, said another, and still another. All these voices were all of the other snowflakes. The whirling, rushing wind had pushed them into one another, and they did not like it one bit. It is good and necessary for you to bump into one another. That way you will learn how to get along. You are all on a very special journey. You each have a very special purpose. Who is that? Asked the little snowflake. The sunshine. All I see are clouds above, a lot of annoying little snowflakes like me, and we all seem to be bumping into each other a lot. Where are you? Bump. The little snowflake's conversation with the sunshine was interrupted. It had landed in a snowbank and was surrounded by all kinds of different-looking snowflakes. They all lay there complaining. I don't like it when I'm stuck here with all of you. I don't like it either, said another snowflake. It's way too crowded here. Get off of me, and so on. And then the sun came out. Here I am at last, said the sunshine. It is good and necessary for you to lie here on this snow. Ever so slowly grew upward into a tree, which gave life and nourishment to other plants and animals and insects and life, and provided shade to a family, your family. And then, because of a wonderful, magical scientific thing called photosynthesis, the little snowflakes' many molecules were breathed out of the pores of the now mighty oak tree. By this time, the little snowflake had changed and let go so many times that it didn't mind anymore. It was just as excited to see what the next part of its special journey would be. And there it was, still alive, but now it was the wind, dancing in the sunshine. That was it. Dancing in the sunshine must be its special purpose. Until a cloud began to form and drew the little snowflake into itself as a tiny seed. And everything started all over again.